A lot of the concepts that are incorporated into mindfulness come from a lot of Eastern philosophy, which is a very different way of thinking about things than the way we think about things in Western culture. As a result, as we talk about mindfulness and as you consider how mindfulness might be helpful or advantageous in recovery work, I want you to be open to the idea that there could be some hidden tigers in some of the concepts that I'll be talking about. And even as you practice mindfulness in your recovery efforts, be open to the idea that there are some hidden tigers, maybe some things you cannot see initially, but that if you stay with it and stick with it long enough, that those hidden tigers will emerge.
So the obvious question that should be stirring around in your mind right now is, what's a hidden tiger? So this picture of a tiger is represented here, and I want you to take a minute and see if you can find the hidden tiger. So pause this recording and see if you can find the hidden tiger. Now, some of you may think you found it, and in fact, some of you will have found it, but the vast majority of people will not have found the hidden tiger. So let me help. The hidden tiger is actually in the stripes. THEHIDDEN, TIGER. Now, what is a little bit misleading here is that I've showed you a picture of a hidden tiger and then told you to look for the hidden tiger. So I've kind of primed you in your attention. I've created a bias in the way you focused your attention to look for a pictorial representation of a hidden tiger. And by doing that, you actually missed seeing the picture of, or the textual representation of the hidden tiger. And so this little exercise is something that I use to kind of introduce the idea of the hidden tiger in your work with mindfulness.
So first of all, let me tell you a little bit about what mindfulness is. A Time magazine issue several years ago kind of talked about the mindfulness revolution and how mindfulness is being used in so many things. And as part of a mindfulness and getting educated about mindfulness, it's important to understand kind of what it is. First of all, it's a philosophy and a practice of cultivating increased awareness in our moment-to-moment experiences in a non-judgmental way. Now, that's going to sound a little confusing perhaps initially, but as we move along, hopefully that will become more clear. The practice of mindfulness, although it's based on a lot of principles of Buddhism and so forth, it was medicalized by an individual named Jon Kabat-Zinn, and has been applied in a variety of different psychological and medical issues throughout the past 10 years successfully. And so some of the things we'll be talking about are some of the principles of mindfulness in terms of psychologically how it might be beneficial for you in your recovery work. So to start with, there are two different components of mindfulness. One has to do with attention. And a number of years ago, a number of individuals got together and kind of came up with some of these ways of discussing mindfulness and these components. One was defined as a self-regulation of attention so that it's maintained on the immediate experience. And then that really is like second by second what's happening right now. And in focusing attention in that way, it allows for increased recognition of mental events and that are going on in the present moment. So the first thing mindfulness is intended to do is to help increase your ability to regulate your attention more effectively. We'll talk about why that's important shortly. The second thing is a component of mindfulness has to do with the attitude that it cultivates. It helps us adopt a particular orientation towards the experiences that we have kind of in the present moment. And it's characterized by this curiosity or this openness or this acceptance of whatever's happening in the moment without trying to change it, to alter it, to make up stories about it, but just simply being open to noticing in a curious way. So these are the components of mindfulness that we are trying to cultivate when we practice mindfulness meditation. So when I talk about like mindfulness and how it's cultivated, I often use the analogy of a road trip. If you were going on a road trip and you came back from the road trip and you said, hey, I had an amazing road trip, and I said, how was riding in the car for the last week been? You would probably look at me and say, well, well, I was in my vehicle, but you should have seen the amazing things that I saw. And then you would talk about these breathtaking views as you drove on your road trip and all the wonderful things that you saw and the experiences that you had. And if I were to try to reduce your road trip to just being in a vehicle, you would probably think I missed the whole point of the road trip. Well, this analogy can be applied to mindfulness. Often when we talk about mindfulness, we talk about cultivating it through meditation practices. But for us to reduce mindfulness and say mindfulness is just meditation would be missing the point. Meditation is a vehicle to cultivate mindfulness in a wide array of mindful moments that enhances our ability to regulate attention and to reorganize our experience with the present moment in a way that often leads to some increased insight and awareness. And so the meditation is the vehicle. Mindfulness is the experience that we have through this vehicle of meditation. Now, meditation can often be challenging at first. It can be difficult. But the point is, by strengthening and stressing and stretching the muscles of the brain, so to speak, that they become stronger. It's kind of like if you went to the gym and you said, hey, I've been working out for a week. Why am I not able to lift these dumbbells easier? You would almost laugh and you would say, well, yeah, you need to be sticking with this for a couple of months before you're going to notice a difference. And similarly with mindfulness, I would encourage you to not give up prematurely, to stick with this. It does help. And there's been a number of studies that have shown that mindfulness can be advantageous in problem gambling recovery.
Before we get too far into this presentation on mindfulness, let's do a small mindfulness exercise, a meditation exercise. This particular exercise is going to be guided by Diana Winston, who is one of our mindfulness instructors at the Mindfulness Awareness Research Center at UCLA. So find a comfortable position and see if you can focus your attention on this guided meditation experience of a mindfulness exercise.
You can use this practice to work with difficult emotions or body sensations. Find a posture that's comfortable to you. And then check inside your body and try to locate a part of your body that feels good to you right now. Pleasant, safe, at ease, or at the very least, neutral. You can check out your hands or feet or legs. So let your attention go to this pleasant part of your body, hands or feet, or wherever you've chosen. And let your attention rest there. Feel it. Sense it. Notice what those sensations are. Let your mind relax a bit, feeling that part of the body. And now, if there's something difficult that's happening for you, a difficult emotion or a physical sensation that's hard, let your attention go to that. So it may be an aching in your shoulder or back or a headache, or it could be a sense of sadness or anxiety or anger. Where do you feel that sensation in your body? Where do you feel that emotion in your body? Notice it. Just notice it for one moment. Tap into it. Feel it. Make sure to breathe. And now return your attention back down to that area that feels at ease. Your hands or feet or legs. And just let yourself stay there for a moment, feeling it, sensing it, relaxing, maintaining the mindfulness, yet giving yourself a break from what could be potentially overwhelming to feel. And now once again, return your attention to that part of the body that feels unpleasant. The body ache or pain, or the emotion, the sensations of the emotion in your body. The vibrations on your chest, or the clenching in your belly, or the tightness in your jaw. Just notice and breathe and let it be there. Let whatever is there be there. And then bring your attention again back down to this pleasant or neutral part of the body. Hands, feet, so forth. Relaxing, staying present and alert, feeling the safety and the connection in that place. And now let yourself stay connected to this place, but see if you can cast what we might call a sidelong glance at the difficult area in your body. Is it possible to still feel connected to your body in the area that feels good, and yet know there's something going on that feels unpleasant, and just let it be there, keeping maybe 75% of your attention on the part that feels peaceful and at ease. Still breathing. Casting the sidelong glance at this difficult area. Noticing what happens to it. Is it growing or shrinking? Is it changing, shifting into something else? Becoming aware of whatever it is it's doing. Relaxing, breathing. And now see if you can bring some loving kindness, just some kindness to yourself for whatever you're feeling right now. Physical pain, emotional pain. Hold yourself with kindness. You're not the only one. So may we all be free from our pain and our suffering. May we all have happiness.
So, what was that like for you? Did you find your mind wandering throughout that exercise? Were you able to stay focused? Did you find yourself perhaps more relaxed at the end of it? Well, this is just an example of how a meditation exercise is used in cultivating mindfulness. And we'll do more of these exercises, but I wanted to just give you an initial exposure to one of the mindfulness exercises. So some of the things that you're going to be asked to do with mindfulness exercises may not make sense to you at first. And yet, if you stick at them long enough, there will come a point where you will start to understand what these exercises of meditation have to do with problem gambling recovery. For those of you that have been around, perhaps you've seen the movie Karate Kid. I want to show you a clip where Mr. Miyagi is having Daniel do all of these waxing the cars and so forth. And Daniel gets to this point where he just gets frustrated. It's like, what does this have to do with learning karate? You may find a similar experience as you're given meditation exercises as a way of cultivating attention and so forth. And you'll be, well, what does this have to do with problem gambling? But understand and have faith that it will at some point come together for you, just as it did for Daniel. Watch this video and see how it comes together for him, how the waxing of the cars generalizes to his desire to learn karate.
Sand floor. Sand floor. Big sucker. Sand floor. Sand floor. Yes. Now show me wax on, wax off. Hey.
Wax on, wax off.
Wax on, wax off. Hey, wax on, hot. Wax off, hot. Concentrate. Look at my eye. Lock a hand. Thumb inside. Wax on, hot. Wax off, hot. Wax on, hot. Wax off, hot. Wax on. Wax off. Show me penta fence. Up, down. Up, down. Up, down. Other side. Look eye. Always look eye. Show me paint the house. Side, side. Lock wrist. Side, side. Side, side. Yes. Show me wax on, wax off. That! Show me penta fence. That! Show me side to side. That! Show me sand or floor. Oi. Look eye. Always look eye.
So Daniel realizes, wow, okay, this actually does apply. Let's talk about some things with problem gambling and maybe how they correlate with things that we cultivate or learn in mindfulness. For example, in problem gambling behaviors, there's a lot of shame. The antidote to shame is cultivating self-compassion, which we do through mindfulness. A lot of problem gamblers report being bored. And one of the things that we do with mindfulness is we learn how to cultivate awareness. And a lot of times, partially in cultivating awareness, we're cultivating attention. Some people have suggested, and there's literature on this, to suggest boredom is actually a result of the inability to sustain attention. Problem gambling is often triggered by stress, and it perpetuates stress. Well, in mindfulness, we learn to kind of let go of the stories that give rise to stress. A lot of problem gamblers, but not all, have characteristics of impulsivity. Where mindfulness, we learn to slow things down and be curious rather than reactive to various situations that we're in. Problem gambling also is often associated with a lack of gratitude, wanting more and feeling entitled, where mindfulness cultivates gratitude and humility. Problem gambling is often an emotional reaction to whatever's going on in the moment, where mindfulness is helping you learn how to stay with and be emotionally present and curious about whatever's going on rather than reacting to it. In mindfulness, there's a lot of discomfort, intolerance for discomfort, or I should say in problem gambling, there's a lot of intolerance for discomfort associated with various experiences, and people just run to the casino or run to gamble when they have uncomfortable experiences as a way of kind of escaping that discomfort. Where mindfulness is teaching us to recognize and reorganize our relationship with whatever discomfort or suffering we may experience. In problem gambling, there's often self-criticism and judgmentalness, where mindfulness is open and non-judgmental. Problem gambling often has elements of rumination, preoccupation, obsessing, thinking about how I'm going to get money to gamble again, or when is the next time I can go gamble. Where mindfulness is not about rumination, it's about reflection. Problem gambling has a lot of associations with mental health things such as depression and anxiety, where mindfulness is teaching us to let go of the thoughts that give rise to things such as depression and anxiety and just be present in the moment. In problem gambling, people who are trying to change often get into that tug of war with their cravings, where mindfulness says, don't judge the cravings. They're neither good nor bad. Just be present with them. Be curious about them. In problem gambling, a lot of special status is given to thoughts, not just thoughts about gambling, but a lot of irrational beliefs about gambling and the outcomes of gambling and the ability to predict outcomes of gambling, where mindfulness just teaches us a thought is just a thought. And we don't give special status to thoughts. We just notice them and let them go. Problem gambling sometimes is about thought suppression or compartmentalizing things in our lives, where mindfulness is cultivating this openness and integration of our lives. And finally, problem gambling is about disconnecting. It's about being inattentive and disassociating from whatever problems may exist or stressors in life and kind of just losing myself gambling. Whereas mindfulness is teaching us to be attentive and present in the moment as opposed to disconnecting from the moment. So I want to talk to you about the things that you can expect if you exert energy and effort into practicing mindfulness. First, it's going to increase your tolerance for the discomfort or uncomfortable feelings. You'll learn how to be present, curious, open, and non-judgmental to various emotions that you have. Mindfulness also helps cultivate a greater ability to cope with stress. We learn to let go of the stories that often give rise to stress, and regulating breathing helps reduce stress. Mindfulness is also going to help you learn how to reorganize your relationship with the cravings, the urges. We learn how to let go of the thoughts about those cravings and be present within the body, being curious about those cravings and open, non-judgmental. That doesn't mean that we focus on what would it be like to kind of satisfy those cravings. It's just being curious about the physiological experience in the body as we may have a craving. Mindfulness is also going to enhance your ability to regulate your attention, as we talked about earlier. And that in of itself is golden. Learning how to sustain my attention and focus on what's happening in the moment as opposed to getting distracted with thoughts is a component of mindfulness that's going to be incredibly valuable in problem gambling recovery. And finally, there's some evidence to suggest that mindfulness can help reduce impulsivity through slowing people down and giving them a little bit of a space. And in that space, they have increased levels of self-control, and they reduce the effect of this emotional dysregulation on impulsive kinds of responses. I want to talk about this particular study that's interesting on gambling and mindfulness, because the authors stated gambling disordered patients exhibited significantly lower levels of mindfulness, emotional regulation, stress coping, and impulse control compared to the non-gambling disordered group. Overall, gambling severity was negatively associated with higher levels of mindfulness and positively linked to indices of emotional dysregulation, stress proneness, and impulsivity. So these correlates between mindfulness and emotional dysregulation and impulsivity were much stronger than those between mindfulness and the severity of the gambling disordered behaviors. But part of what I would want you to take here is that mindfulness then can perhaps indirectly help reduce problem gambling by reducing emotional reactivity and helping with stress coping and reducing all of the things that kind of lead to problem gambling behavior. And this was a study that we did a few years ago and published. There's been other studies, I might add, but collectively, what the studies conclude is that there's support for mindfulness in working through addiction recovery work with problem gambling. So let's talk first about how mindfulness can increase tolerance for uncomfortable feelings. In other words, learning to be present, curious, and open, non-judgmental of emotions, and increasing self-awareness.
So one of the ways we increase our tolerance for unpleasant experiences is we let ourselves experience unpleasant experiences or emotions. And that seems a little bit circular, but allow me to explain. We often polarize emotions, or we think about emotions as being all good, all bad. On the one end of the spectrum, positive, comfortable, good, pleasant experiences. And on the other end of the spectrum, awkward, uncomfortable, bad, or unpleasant experiences. At least these are the things we tell ourselves. And emotions, things like boredom or powerlessness or shame, or sometimes when people are rejected and the emotions that come up in the wake of feeling rejected, or having conflict with a romantic partner. These are all emotions that are often characterized as unpleasant or problematic in some way. And we unconsciously kind of have this arbitrary line that separates the two. And as many of us know, and as you know, is if you're struggling with an addiction, you will know that often you turn to your addictive behavior to kind of numb out or disconnect or escape or activate all that pleasure reward circuitry in the brain that saturates the very parts of the reward centers of the brain that gives you the euphoric experience that allows you to escape these uncomfortable, unpleasant emotions. And there's lots of different things that can do this. For example, sex, gambling, food, drugs, or alcohol. All of these things activate pleasure reward circuitry in a part of the brain that gives you that mood altering experience. But what we don't plan on, and this is something to think about the next time you get triggered, is that by turning to your addiction, what you do is you end up actually reducing, even though you think what you're doing is just saying, hey, now all I'm going to do is experience the positive emotions. I don't have to worry about the negative emotions because I've avoided them through my addiction. But really that arbitrary line, it shifts. And then think about what that does to the bandwidth. It reduces your bandwidth because that arbitrary line shifts to accommodate this new normal of you never letting yourself feel anything that's unpleasant or uncomfortable, including many loved ones, friends, or family who confront you about your addiction. You don't want to think about that. You don't want to deal about that. You get defensive and it activates your shame or guilt. And then you turn back to your substance or your addiction. And so by chronically avoiding these unpleasant mood states, you think that you have successfully kind of avoided them. But really, again, that arbitrary line shifts. And then the bandwidth of positive emotions also shifts with it. So that now there's less bandwidth to feel the positive. And this kind of goes back and forth until the point where it's so reduced that people who struggle with gambling problems or other kinds of addictions, they become emotionally avoidant. And yes, that might help them detach from the uncomfortable experiences, but it also disconnects them from the pleasant experiences. And as a result, they develop this almost emotional numbness in their ability to feel positive emotions and negative emotions. And that's what often happens. This makes sense intuitively. How do we appreciate a sunny day? We allow ourselves to experience a rainy day. It's that contrast. It's the comparison of those contrasts that helps us appreciate the sunshine, is because we let ourselves experience the rain, so to speak. This can happen across a lot of different domains in our life. For example, if you're feeling healthy right now, physically, how is it that you're able to appreciate that health? Well, we draw comparisons in our life to times when we were sick. And it's by those comparisons and contrasting that we are able to appreciate positive health that we might be having. So back to the idea here of increasing our tolerance for unpleasant emotions. What we're doing is we're saying we've got to lean in and learn how to be present with those uncomfortable experiences, as opposed to turning to addictions to kind of negate or escape those feelings. It's by being present with those experiences and re-engaging with those uncomfortable experiences that we are able to increase our tolerance. And mindfulness, that's what it's about. It's about being present with that uncomfortable, unpleasant emotion, but not getting caught up in the stories that we make up about that unpleasant experience. So some data that actually support this idea of mindfulness being helpful for various uncomfortable, unpleasant emotions and other things that typically lead to problem gambling is a study that we did several years ago. And you may be able to relate to this, where people who experience anxiety often experience some depression or vice versa. And there's these complex interactions between all of these different things. So impulsivity interacts with anxiety or depression, and people who are stressed or might be more impulsive, or someone who's stressed might also be anxious. And what you may experience also is that when you're having anxiety or depression or feeling stressed, or sometimes just impulsivity in relation to these things, you're more likely to gamble. And what we found in our study was that mindfulness can reduce things like depression and anxiety and increase your ability to cope with stress and not be so impulsive. And so through exerting an effect on these variables, it then exerts an effect in turn on problem gambling. And so that is what we found. And we also found that mindfulness directly reduced problem gambling through some variants that we didn't know in the study. We weren't able to determine that. But my point here is that if you are someone, and this doesn't apply to every single problem gambler, but for many problem gamblers, if they are feeling things such as anxiety or depression or stress, or they have traits of impulsivity, they are more likely to gamble. And this is what contributes to problematic gambling. And again, that is why mindfulness can help enhance people's ability to cope with these experiences, these difficult, painful experiences in many cases, in more healthy ways without having to turn to problem gambling.
So now I want to give you a little bit of exposure to what a mindfulness exercise might look like when you're struggling with some difficult emotions. And so now, once again, Diana Winston from UCLA will guide you through a mindfulness exercise that one might do to deal with difficult or unpleasant emotions. So even though you may not be feeling any difficult emotions right now, this will give you an idea of one of the things that we would do with difficult emotions in mindfulness.
You can use this practice to work with difficult emotions or body sensations. Find a posture that's comfortable to you. And then check inside your body and try to locate a part of your body that feels good to you right now. Pleasant, safe, at ease, or at the very least, neutral. You can check out your hands or feet or legs. So let your attention go to this pleasant part of your body, hands or feet, or wherever you've chosen. And let your attention rest there. Feel it. Sense it. Notice what those sensations are. Let your mind relax a bit, feeling that part of the body. And now, if there's something difficult that's happening for you, a difficult emotion or a physical sensation that's hard, let your attention go to that. So it may be an aching in your shoulder or back or a headache, or it could be a sense of sadness or anxiety or anger. Where do you feel that sensation in your body? Where do you feel that emotion in your body? Notice it. Just notice it for one moment. Tap into it. Feel it. Make sure to breathe. And now return your attention back down to that area that feels at ease, your hands or feet or legs. And just let yourself stay there for a moment, feeling it, sensing it, relaxing, maintaining the mindfulness, yet giving yourself a break from what could be potentially overwhelming to feel. And now once again, return your attention to that part of the body that feels unpleasant. The body ache or pain, or the emotion, the sensations of the emotion in your body. The vibrations on your chest, or the clenching in your belly, or the tightness in your jaw. Just notice and breathe and let it be there. Let whatever is there be there. And then bring your attention again back down to this pleasant or neutral part of the body, hands, feet, so forth. Relaxing, staying present and alert, feeling the safety and the connection in that place. And now let yourself stay connected to this place, but see if you can cast what we might call a sidelong glance at the difficult area in your body. Is it possible to still feel connected to your body in the area that feels good, and yet know there's something going on that feels unpleasant, and just let it be there, keeping maybe 75% of your attention on the part that feels peaceful and at ease. Still breathing. Casting the sidelong glance at this difficult area. Noticing what happens to it. Is it growing or shrinking? Is it changing, shifting into something else? Becoming aware of whatever it is it's doing. Relaxing, breathing. And now see if you can bring some loving kindness, just some kindness to yourself for whatever you're feeling right now. Physical pain, emotional pain. Hold yourself with kindness. You're not the only one. So may we all be free from our pain and our suffering. May we all have happiness.
So that is an example of how you might approach difficult or unpleasant experiences that may arise for you that would otherwise perhaps trigger a gambling episode. This is a way to kind of lean into them and to be present with those uncomfortable or unpleasant emotional states so that you don't have to turn to gambling as a way of coping. Now, I realize if you're listening to this right now, you probably were not experiencing an uncomfortable emotion. But again, that was just an example to give you an idea of what they're like. Will be links provided for you that will allow you to access this at other times. And also there's an app the link which will be provided as well, for you to be able to download the UCLA Mindfulness app so that you can access all of these different exercises as part of your recovery work. And so now I want to transition and talk about stress and how stress can be a trigger for problem gambling.
A lot of times stress is a precipitating risk factor. In other words, it triggers gambling behaviors. And it also perpetuates gambling behaviors. People get stressed, they go, they gamble, and then they have consequences from problem gambling, and then they feel more stressed, and it's just this vicious cycle. Well, stress coping is also something that we try to cultivate through mindfulness practices, and part of this is learning to regulate breathing, which reduces stress. And so you've noticed that during the mindfulness exercises, our breathing, we pay attention to that, and by paying attention to that, it often shifts and gets modified, although that's not necessarily the intention. So have you ever thought about stress? What is stress really? I mean, stress is just this perception that we don't have enough resources to meet all the demands in our lives. And that in of itself is a story. And one of the things that we do with mindfulness is we just let go of stories. We tell ourselves a thought is just a thought, it's not a fact. Just because we think something doesn't make it true. And that way we just actually learn to be present with the experience of whatever's going on in the moment, as opposed to going to our head and making up all kinds of stories about the things that could go wrong or why we don't have enough resources and so forth. So with mindfulness, one of the things we do when we practice meditative exercises is we learn to be present in the body and notice what's going on. And as a result of that and learning to regulate our breathing more effectively, we, by extension, we actually help our bodies and our minds cope with stressful experiences more effectively. And in fact, there's been a number of different studies that have shown how mindfulness helps us cope with stress more effectively. And we have found that that is also true with problem gamblers in their recovery works. So now I want to talk about how mindfulness helps us reorganize our relationships with cravings, letting go of thoughts about cravings, being present, kind of noticing, being curious about the cravings, non-judgmental, and so forth. The one thing that I want to say is that we live in a society that is really, across the board, through various advertising, sometimes witty, clever advertising campaigns, kind of tells us, give into your craving, right? Give into your craving and satisfy your craving and your urge. And we almost have normalized that. However, that's not healthy most of the time. And I want you to think about this particular advertisement, and I'm not intentionally trying to pick on McDonald's, but I want you to think about this. Listen to this advertisement about cravings and McDonald's.
Whoa. Hello, Jonathan. It is I, your craving.
It's like 3 in the morning. I wasn't expecting you.
I could tell. Your place is a disaster.
Well, it's funny you're here. I could really go for
2 all-beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun.
Yeah, how did you...
I'm your craving, Jonathan. Let us get a Big Mac at McDonald's. Don't worry, I DVR'd the game.
Crave as late as you want. Many McDonald's drive-thrus are now open 24 hours.
As you can see, that was a clever little commercial, you know. Give into your craving, doesn't matter what time it is, day or night. Go and order a large, supersized meal that probably has more calories in one meal than you should be eating in an entire day. And don't worry about the consequences, and so forth. Again, this message, give into your cravings. Now, one of the interesting things about mindfulness is we don't say give into the craving. We invite people to just accept. And accepting the craving doesn't mean, again, acting out on the craving. There was a study that was done with people that were struggling with food cues and being overweight. And they taught these people mindfulness exercises. And the authors of the study found that it actually was helpful. And this is what they said. Acceptance was found to reduce the extent to which participants experienced a loss of control when exposed to food cues. In other words, they weren't getting to this tug of war with their food cues. Right? They're just saying, hey, I got a craving to eat food. That's okay. I can create a little bit of space for that, and I don't have to react to it or get into a tug of war with it. The authors continue, this finding is not only practically relevant, but interestingly, from a theoretical point of view as well. They stated, after all, acceptance requires one not to control cravings, which paradoxically leads to higher levels of perceived control. And this is what a lot of problem gamblers find, is when they let go of the need to control the craving, slay the dragon, if you will, that they actually feel more empowered in their ability to kind of just coexist with that craving as opposed to react to it. If you think about it, addictive cravings, they can be very powerful, they can be very intense, and patients do get into a tug of war. Problem gamblers, you yourself have probably gotten into a tug of war with these cravings. And we give special status to these cravings, right? Or we tell ourselves things about these cravings. I can't, I'm not gonna be able to resist this craving, or this craving is gonna go on forever until I give into it, and so forth. And it creates this adversarial relationship with cravings. But the thing to realize is that your cravings are 2 steps removed from the consequences, right? You have a craving, you go gamble, and then there's the consequences. The consequences are what is often bad or problematic, not the cravings themselves. The craving is just a physiological experience in the body. And we're reorganizing our relationship with that craving in such a way where we can coexist. We're not avoiding it, but we're not indulging it. We're just being curious about it and present with it, saying, hey, craving's here, and I can just create a little bit of space. Listen to Dr. Hetty Kober as she talks about this process.
Mindfulness can be thought of as a non-judgmental attention to one's moment-to-moment experience, or kind of an accepting attitude towards whatever arises in the experience. And in the last 20 years, there's actually been quite a lot of research on mindfulness showing that it's effective for anything from stress through depression, anxiety, and chronic pain. In the last few years, some research was done that suggests that mindfulness training, or different forms of mindfulness training, are effective for substance use disorders, are effective for hypersexual behavior, and effective for pathological gambling. And one idea is that the reason why it's effective is because it teaches people a new way to interact with their craving, or a new way to interact with their kind of compulsive urges. And one way that mindfulness training might do that is by teaching people to, first of all, notice when craving arises, kind of notice what's happening in the body, notice what it feels like, and just have the awareness to know that it's there, coupled with this feeling of acceptance. It's okay that the craving is here, without pushing it away, without wanting it to go away, just saying, oh, craving is here, and it's okay. And that's also often accompanied by a teaching that craving is kind of like all mental events. It comes and goes. It has kind of an ebb and flow of its own. And therefore, if a drug user, for example, can learn to recognize the craving, accept that it's there, and then notice as it maybe gets more and more intense, reaches its peak, and then goes away, perhaps even using a technique we call noting while that's happening. And it might be something as general as saying, oh, I'm feeling craving, I'm still feeling craving, or getting even more granular, more small in what you might notice. So for example, tightening in the stomach, oh, it's getting tighter, maybe tightening in the chest, sweaty palms, oh, okay, now it's relieving, and now it's falling away.
Not surprisingly, there's been a lot of different studies that have shown how mindfulness does help cope with cravings for a variety of different addictive behaviors. And so I want you to invite you to think about how it could be helpful for you. The next thing I want to talk about is that mindfulness can enhance your ability to regulate your attention and sustain your focus of your attention on whatever's happening in the moment, and we letting go of the distracting thoughts, including thoughts about gambling, and refocusing attention again and again. As many times as your mind wanders, you let it go every time, and you refocus the attention again and again. This is an interesting way to think about a gambling problem, or any addiction, as really a problem of attention. In other words, it's this inability to sustain attention and be vigilant about whatever we need to be focused on, work, for example, and we're not able to inhibit our attention from wandering to whatever the distraction is, right? And in this case, it's gambling. So in an attentive condition, in other words, if you had better attention or better ability to regulate your attention, you'd be able to sustain your attention, for example, on work, and you'd be able to inhibit your attention from wandering to thinking about gambling. Whereas when you're struggling with the addictive behavior and you're engaging in problem gambling behavior, you're kind of in an inattentive condition. You're not able to sustain your attention and focus on things that you need to focus on, and like work, and your attention is getting redirected to focusing on things such as the problem gambling. And so, again, remember, one of the things that we do in mindfulness through these meditation exercises is we're learning to regulate our attention so that it's focused on the immediate experience, and that allows for increased recognition of various events that could be happening in the moment. But the point here is that by increasing your ability to regulate your attention, you can focus your attention on the things you need to focus it on. You can inhibit your attention from being distracted on the things that you don't want to be focusing on, like problem gambling behavior. And that is how it can be advantageous in your recovery work. In mindfulness, there are some different processes that happen with this part of regulating attention. We're focusing our attention, like in the exercise we did earlier. We're focusing our attention, for example, on our breathing. And then all of a sudden we notice that our mind has wandered. And then we let go of that mind wandering behavior, and then we refocus our attention. Now, to begin with, these bars on this graph show that it takes more time. We spend more time mind wandering. It takes us a longer amount of time to notice that our mind's wandered, a longer time to let go of the wandering thoughts, and then a longer time refocusing our attention. And mindfulness shortens that across the board. We spend less time being inattentive before mindfulness. And in mindfulness, what we're doing is we're reducing the bandwidth of that time spent with our minds wandering. The amount of time that we notice our minds wandered is shorter. The time to let go, we're able to let go quicker because we've noticed that our mind has wandered, and we're able to refocus. We're quicker at refocusing our attention. And so, the time that is spent being inattentive before mindfulness is obviously a lot more, whereas after mindfulness, that time is reduced. And that's part of how we're cultivating attentional focus in mindfulness exercises. So another way that mindfulness can be helpful for people with addictive behaviors, and particularly problem gamblers, is by helping people not be so impulsive. And in fact, people who really practice mindfulness on a regular basis are less impulsive, and there's been a number of studies to support this. And one of the ways it reduces impulsivity is through helping people kind of be present with the space, if you will, that it increases levels of self-control, and it reduces the effect of emotional dysregulation on impulsive responses. There are several types of impulsivity. We often talk about people being impulsive or not impulsive, but sometimes there's context-specific impulsiveness. So, for example, maybe a problem gambler is impulsive in the wake of a thought or a craving to gamble, but they're not impulsive in the way that they drive or in other aspects of their life. They don't have this generalized impulsivity. That being said, there are some different types of impulsivity. For example, in some of the research on impulsivity, we've noticed that one type of impulsivity called negative urgency is about people reacting impulsively in the wake of a negative mood state. There's positive urgency, which is an impulsivity where people have diminished control in the wake of a positive emotion. In other words, I go gamble because I'm feeling excited or happy. And then there's just general sensation seeking. This is a tendency to kind of engage in excitement seeking, novelty, thrilling experiences. And this type of impulsivity is correlated with a lot greater risk-taking behaviors. And then there's kind of this lack of premeditation, like, oh, you didn't really think that one through, right? They're not really having this future-directed thinking, like I'm thinking clearly about the consequences of the choices that I'm making. And sometimes gamblers, they will say, oh yeah, I knew that maybe wouldn't be a good thing, but they just kind of compartmentalize and they block it out of their mind so they can give themselves permission to gamble. That's the permissive type of thinking. And then there's an impulsivity that's associated with just this impatience, like I do something impulsively because I don't have the ability to sustain attention long enough to kind of see things through. I just like, okay, yeah, let's do that. And it's that kind of impulsivity. But regardless of what kind of impulsivity people have, we know that at least half of problem gamblers have impulsive characteristics. We did a study on this and found that it was true also for people with sex addiction and substance use disorders. But the point here is that mindfulness kind of helps reduce that impulsivity.
And there's a quote. This quote is often attributed to Dr. Viktor Frankl. However, it's actually was originated with Dr. Rollo May. And it's this: between the stimulus and response, he said, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. That was a general kind of idea of what he was trying to get people to understand. And the idea here is that, let's say the stimulus, for example, is a thought or a craving to gamble. And that's the stimulus. And then there's your response to the stimulus. What Dr. May is saying here is like there's a space there. A lot of times we skip over that space because like you want to go gamble. So you don't really, you just ignore that space. Mindfulness helps slow people down so they can be present in that space. And it's there in that space that you have the power to choose. It's more empowering to slow things down and make a better choice. And therein, Dr. May suggests, is the ability to grow and also the freedom. Think about that. Freedom is the antithesis of addiction. Addiction is about enslavement to whatever your addiction is, where slowing things down and not being so impulsive, being in that space long enough to notice that there's a bit of a time period between when I get triggered and what I do about that trigger, and that space is where you're able to make a better choice. And that slows things down so that you're not quite as impulsive. And that's kind of what mindfulness does. So kind of a summary here. And the point here is that as a gambler who's struggling, I want you to understand that mindfulness, it can be helpful in these ways. First, it can increase your tolerance for the uncomfortable feelings. Often these uncomfortable feelings are things that you may choose to turn to gambling to escape. It can help enhance your ability to cope with stress. Stress is often a trigger for gambling. And it not only triggers gambling, but it triggers continued gambling if you never develop any better ways to cope with stress. Mindfulness gives you a mechanism or a way to reorganize your relationship with the craving. And that can be incredibly powerful. As you did the exercise, the mindfulness exercise on dealing with an uncomfortable craving, you can understand how that might work. And it's about really paying attention to what's going on in the body and not judging the craving as being a bad thing, realizing that the consequences of gambling associated with the craving is what's problematic. And then mindfulness also enhances ability to regulate attention. And by sustaining attention on the things that you need to focus on and concentrate on, and letting go of the distracting thoughts and refocusing your attention again and again and again, that's the wax on, wax off stuff that you're learning how to do, so that when you're in that moment and you're at work and then you have those cravings or the thoughts that are coming into your mind, that you can let it go and let it go. And you can let it go 100 times if you need to, because you will say to yourself, hey, I can handle this. I practice letting go again and again and again, rather than being in this situation where like you have a thought a couple of times and you just tell yourself, oh, I need to go gamble because this thought's just going to keep bothering me until I do something about it. And then it reduces impulsivity for the ways that we've talked about, letting you be present with the space, and in that space being able to make a better decision. So in conclusion then, the idea that mindfulness can really help you kind of reorganize your relationship with so many things that are associated with problem gambling should give you hope. And it would be my hope, and the hope of all mental health providers that work with problem gambling, that you would perhaps utilize mindfulness as one tool that you can maybe engage in with the meditation exercises on a daily, regular basis to try to cultivate some of these skills and abilities that we've been talking about. So I want to kind of just look at this video of A Beautiful Mind, two little clips. One is John Nash, who you remember portrays as having schizophrenia. And when he gets caught up in the tug of war or the wrestling match with his hallucination, you'll see in the first clip here, he loses that battle. It doesn't end well. Let's watch this video.
Well, this guy tries to wander into the library, but he doesn't have ID.
Why can't people read their memos, huh?
Then he goes totally nuts.
Is this what you are, soldier? Some useless ghoul? The local madman? I'm no soldier. You're gonna end up in a cell. Old, worthless, discarded. There's no mission. And while you rock and drool, the world will burn to ashes. You are not real. You are not real. You're still talking to me, soldier. There's no mission. I'm not a soldier. John? Hey, John, it's okay. I just heard what happened. I'm sorry, John.
I'm not a soldier.
John, hey, Nash, hey. Hey, you're all right. Nash, hey. Ladies and gentlemen, the great John Nash.
So as you can tell, he's completely spiraled out of control as he gets into this tug of war, this fight with his hallucination. Imagine that hallucination being your thoughts or your cravings to gamble. Now, what he learned to do was to reorganize his relationship with his hallucinations, just like mindfulness can help you reorganize your relationship with thoughts or cravings to gamble, so that he didn't have to get into that tug of war. This second video shows how, towards the end of his life, he just learned to say, yep, there's my hallucinations. Didn't need to react to them. Just like mindfulness can help you create a space that says, hey, if my craving's here, that's fine. I don't have to do anything about it. So let's watch this video.
I'll call for the car then.
Are you ready to go now?
Yes, I am. Yes, indeed, and yes, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you. What is it? What's wrong?
Nothing. Nothing at all. Come with me, young lady.
Oh.
The car outside. You interested in a ride?
Where's it going to?
Isn't that a different way to responding to the hallucination? And that's what mindfulness can help. It can help you reorganize the way you respond to cravings and urges and thoughts about gambling in a way that you don't have to get into this fight of slay the dragon mentality with these gambling cravings and urges and thoughts. So I want to give you some resources to continue in this journey in learning more about mindfulness. One is the Mindfulness Awareness Research Center at UCLA, where we have a lot of free podcasts and free mindfulness exercises that you can do. I've also written an article on mindfulness for gambling addictions and how it can be helpful, and invite you to take a look at that article and use that to the extent that it can be informational and helpful for you. And then finally, there have been several books here that have been noted that are books that have kind of talked about how you can incorporate mindfulness into addiction work and addiction recovery work. And as you do so, you will discover, as many problem gamblers have discovered, that this can be an invaluable resource in helping you. But you have to invest the energy and the effort to doing this every day. And I would suggest if you could start with maybe 5 or 10 minutes a day, and maybe work your way up to like 20 minutes a day, maybe 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the afternoon, of just doing some mindfulness meditation exercises. And as you consistently and persistently apply yourself, you will realize that yes, this is helping, and this can work for you as one resource in your recovery work.